Long Beach Island will sit in the future shadows of one of the projects slated to be constructed by Atlantic Shore's offshore wind. Visible from the beach is Atlantic City. The tallest skyscraper in Atlantic City reaches 718 feet into the air. The turbines being imposed on this community will be over 1,000 feet tall. Here on shore, where the developer wants to bulldoze and run the power cables, we have a national wildlife refuge. Regulations protect animals like the critically endangered piping plovers and their nesting sites from interference by humans. You're not allowed to bring your pet, or a drone, or even a metal detector beyond this point. You're forbidden from flying a kite or playing ball. But foreign companies doing heavy construction won't be a problem. You can't do this, but they can do this. Some locals have banded together in the nonprofit Save LBI, advocating to protect their environment and community from this threat. Their work may be a blueprint for how other communities can hold offshore wind developers accountable. And so we talked today to a veteran engineer of the U.S. Energy Department, who brings to the table facts that offshore wind lobbyists do not want you to hear.
My name's Bob Stern. I'm leading an organization called Save Long Beach Island, which from the name you can tell we have a few concerns about the offshore wind project proposed here. Save LBI is strictly nonpartisan. We're not in the business of promoting or denigrating any political party. Our goal here is to illuminate the pros and cons of this project because we believe this is a significant change to the country, to the state, and it should only be done with that scrutiny. Regarding myself, how I got into this, sort of ironic, because I used to work in Washington for the Energy Department. It's a different department than the Interior Department, which is pursuing these projects. But obviously the Energy Department had a number of different energy projects, and it could have involved coal, natural gas, shale oil, nuclear energy, and so on. And my job there was managing the office that was responsible for making sure that the department's environmental impact statements were good. And by good, I mean that the impact statement is supposed to disclose fully all the good and the bad environmental impacts. Whether myself or my staff preferred one energy system over another was totally irrelevant. The idea was just present things accurately to the public so the public can make decisions on their own. And I think we did a pretty good job of that. Here, what drew me into this was that when I first saw how these projects were being presented, I did not see that full disclosure. In fact, I saw the opposite. I saw unsupported statements. Again, one I remember about the wind turbines not being often visible or being rarely visible, which I knew was just incorrect. And we do feel that the way these sites were selected was not proper, did not result in good sites, and we believe that the sites on the boards right now do violate a number of environmental statutes. And we have provided extensive technical comment to the agencies, trying to give the agencies the opportunity to fix some of these problems so that we will not have to litigate these things in court. But we've not been able to really get a substantive meeting or dialogue about the site selection, about many of these issues. So we are going to pursue these issues in court when we expect the project to be approved. And those suits will cover what we believe are infractions of a number of statutes, including the Marine Mammal Protection Act, the Endangered Species Act, the National Environmental Policy Act, and a number of state statutes as well regarding how the projects are authorized by the state. We frankly are not enthusiastic about filing these lawsuits. We'd rather sit across a table. We believe that people who just want to solve problems might be able to come to some resolutions here. But so far, that has not been in the cards. The litigation that we will be pursuing, which of course is just focused on the project directly off Long Beach Island, but many of the issues that we are raising are common to other projects off the rest of the East Coast. Obviously, each project is somewhat different, but there's a lot of common threads in terms of how the sites were selected, whether alternative sites were put out there for some public review and input. There's a lot of commonalities, the way the noise impacts are calculated for each project. There seems to be a specific model or models that are used to calculate these noise impacts. We found in our last review a number of major problems with those calculations. I won't bore you with the technical details, but it seems that at every turn in the calculation, the assumptions made are optimistic, and you end up with a significant underestimating of the impacts to marine mammals. And we have also, in our lawsuit, asked that those methodologies, those calculations, be subject to a review by an independent committee, because that is extremely important as these projects move forward. We have to make sure that we are calculating these impacts properly. Once these turbines are placed and operating, there is no way to mitigate the impact. So if we get it wrong, there is going to be a significant consequence to marine mammal life off the East Coast. So I believe perhaps some of the lawsuits that we file and that we hope will be successful on may also benefit other projects along the East Coast and perhaps even the West Coast, because there are some projects beginning there as well. What I'd like to do is just take you through some of those problems as well as some of the benefits that have been alleged. And all we're trying to do is try to make sense of this. And so we're trying to have a decent discussion with some facts and with some numbers as to what actually is going on here. You've heard a lot about the benefits of the offshore wind projects, but it's mostly been pretty short phrases like clean energy, green energy, renewable energy. Personally, I haven't seen a lot of that expanded on to give me a clear picture of what the benefits are, but let's run through some of them, okay? You've heard, for example, that this is renewable energy. And the implication there is that it just, once you have it in place, it just sort of goes on forever and you don't have to worry about it. But when you take a little closer look at this, the wind itself may be renewable, but the steel that we put in place to capture it is not. And it has its own lifetime, maybe 20 years, maybe less, given the harsh conditions that we have off the New Jersey coast. But it ain't renewable. The second thing you've heard, perhaps, is that we need to do these projects to address climate change, tackle climate change. Again, you know, kind of vague words. But the real fact of the matter is these projects will do absolutely nothing for climate change. And that's not just me speaking. That is actually statements made by the federal agency, the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management, in some of their final environmental impact statements. And it isn't just the scale of the projects. You wouldn't expect any project in the world to, by itself, have a dramatic effect on climate change, because that's a worldwide global problem. But it actually gets to the physics and the science of climate change, and it's much different than a normal air pollutant. Normal air pollutant, you reduce it, you get some benefit. But in this case, in terms of where the world is headed on climate change, when you actually look at the science, the only effect of these projects, for example, on sea level rise, is to delay whatever sea level rise is coming, not reduce it. And those delays are very short time periods. You're talking in terms of weeks, perhaps months, for a larger greenhouse gas reduction program. So again, some of these alleged benefits, when you really peel off a layer of the onion and look hard, we can't find it. We cannot find it. I think you may have heard that electric costs will go down. That is kind of impossible because this is a very sophisticated, expensive piece of technology, and putting it out in the ocean, maintaining it, is expensive. In fact, this is probably the most expensive way right now to produce electric power. We'll talk about that a little bit later. Job creation, yeah, there will be jobs created, but those jobs are temporary. They are only during a 2, maybe 3-year period when you're constructing the turbines. After that, just to maintain them, look after them, you're talking about very few jobs. If for the project directly off Long Beach Island, I think the number is 90. On the other side of the coin, though, we contend, and I think it's pretty reasonably based, that the visibility of these turbines, which many people do not want to see, is going to cause significant loss in tourism in the area, and with that, jobs are lost. And those jobs are long-term. Once they're lost, they're lost. So in terms of the job picture, yeah, you get some short-term increases in jobs, but that's at the expense of longer-term losses in jobs. One of the other benefits that's been put out speaks to environmental justice, not having contaminating sources of energy in disadvantaged communities. But when you take a harder look, you'd be creating some higher paying jobs in the short term, but at the expense of lower paying jobs in the tourism industry. So exactly how that is going to benefit disadvantaged communities escapes us. So it's been a little hard for us to try to figure out exactly what the benefit is here beyond the phrases. And we're open to hearing more, but we do think that when the country invests perhaps $100 billion in something, we ought to have a clearer statement of what the benefits actually are. On the other hand, we do see a few problems. We'll try to just run through most of them briefly for you. We have a lot of whales and dolphins that migrate just off this lease area, and the noise from the development of these projects through all phases of the project, first with the vessel surveys that go out using high-intensity noise devices to characterize the seabed underneath to determine where you can plant a foundation. Secondly, for the pile driving to plant the foundation. And keep in mind, what you're talking about here is a steel structure that's like 30 feet in diameter. This is not just like driving a spike into the ground. This is a huge structure being driven in by pile driving. It'll take several years to do that. It is very noisy. The pile driving process creates a lot of noise over that period of time. And we have done a lot of analysis concluding that that will have a significant impact on the marine mammals in the area. But the last and the worst is the operation of these turbines. And previously, for smaller turbines, 6 megawatt, 8 megawatt, the operational noise was not so bad. It wasn't that high, and it would dissipate relatively close to the wind complex itself. However, we're not talking anymore about 6 megawatt and 8 megawatt turbines. We're talking about 15 megawatt turbines. And the noise level for those goes up exponentially, fancy mathematical term, but just meaning that it goes up a lot as you go from an 8 megawatt to a 15 megawatt. So we have done extensive analysis on this operational noise problem. We were assisted by a respected acoustics company, XI Engineering, just to try to show you what this impact of the operational noise might be. Here's a diagram again of those wind energy areas, and I'll explain what these lines are in a minute. But what we're talking about here is the migration of the North Atlantic right whale. You may have heard that this whale, it was hunted for centuries. Unfortunately, its population level is down to about 350 animals, and it must migrate north, south every year from feeding grounds up in New England and Canada down to South Carolina and Georgia, where the females give birth, and then they return back up north for the spring. That's its life cycle. That migration must be preserved in order for this whale to have any chance of survival. So this chart in that green line shows where the whale has historically migrated, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. But these red lines show where from each of those wind turbine areas the noise level is high enough for the whale to avoid it. So the whale trying to migrate is going to be faced with all these red line barriers, which studies tell us it will try to avoid. So you can see this does not leave a lot of opportunity for the North Atlantic right whale to continue migrating. So this is perhaps, in terms of the marine mammals, the most serious impact of this project, and similar effects are going to occur for other whales, for the humpback whales, and so on. It has been very disturbing to us. We have presented a lot of data on this problem to the responsible agencies, and so far this problem is just simply being ignored. For many years, we have seen studies and charts and graphs from the agencies, the federal and state agencies, showing that the whale was going to migrate down here, close to shore, where you can see its path will be substantially blocked. It can no longer migrate through that channel. It seemed a little odd to us that in a very recent document from the federal agency that the whale is no longer going to migrate there. That a new study showed that the whale would migrate farther out. I don't want to cast dispersions on the study, but it does seem odd to us that just at this time, when this project close in is about to be approved, the whale has decided to migrate further out. And we'll look at that in depth. But the fact of the matter is, it doesn't matter if the whale migrates further out or closer in. Close in, it encounters the Atlantic Shores project. Farther out, it encounters the other projects in the New York Bight. Either way, its path is blocked. The only, then, alternative for the whale is to migrate much further offshore, 70, 80 miles offshore, but it has not historically done that. And the whale must have a reason for that. Maybe it's food supply, maybe it's water temperature, don't know, but we have to respect what the whale has done a little more than what our own computer models spin out. There have been a recent spike in whale and dolphin deaths that have occurred off the New Jersey and the New York coasts. The potential cause of that was the vessel surveys that are ongoing right now off the coast. And this was not a new issue for us. We had commented to the National Marine Fisheries Service over a year ago, before any of this started, that they were underestimating the impacts from these vessel surveys. Nevertheless, they went ahead, they approved them. So when we saw the whales washing on shore, we were doubly concerned that we had alerted people to this, but it was ignored. The agency since claimed that there's no evidence to link the vessel surveys to the whale and dolphin deaths, but we believe there is evidence. You just have to look for that evidence. And we have done that. We have spent a good deal of time the last 5, 6 months, looking at the location of the vessels, where they were when the whales died. We were told that the events off New Jersey were not that unusual, that they occurred previously in the past at other places along the East Coast. And we looked at that. But first, the events that occurred previously were really not as severe as the one off New Jersey. But regarding those events, we also found that they were associated with an increase in the number of vessel surveys off of those areas. It actually supports our case that the vessel surveys are implicated in these deaths.
To help you picture what we're talking about, here are some excerpts from Atlantic Shore's online advertising showing how they depict their process.
We map the existing environment with geophysical and geotechnical tools. We come up with an understanding of what it is, and that drives how a project is designed. Ultimately, what we're doing is leading to a renewable energy source which is addressing climate change.
We have planned our G&G campaign not only to service one project, but to service all of our lease areas. So our planning for these vessels is to cover our over 400 square miles of 3 lease areas in the New Jersey and New York area. G&G is one of the first things that we do on site, along with collecting our metocean data. If you imagine the whole wind turbine, just like a tree has roots, the wind turbine has a foundation, it goes deep into the ground. So we need to get information from the ground, not only from the surface, but also below the surface. And that tells us how strong the soil is. It tells us if there's any obstructions in the way. We've had vessels in the field continuously over the last 3 years. And this is several years before we actually will put any structures in the water.
So essentially, we're creating a map of the seabed, just like we have maps of our cities. These maps are going to be the foundation in which we understand the environment we're going to be sharing space with.
My name is Daniel McDowell. I'm the Fugro Survey Party Chief for the Fugro Enterprise behind me. The Fugro Enterprise is a geophysical survey vessel. We collect everything from seismic data, sub-bottom profiler, multi-beam, side-scan sonar, a wide range of survey data on board this. We have a complement currently of 28 people on board. Working 6-week rotations, mainly out of the TMT terminal dock here. But we've surveyed all the way up and down the East Coast here from New York to Atlantic City. Multiple projects ongoing with Atlantic Shore's team.
The geophysical work we're doing is mapping things in detail greater than we've ever seen. There are elements of the seabed that we've never discovered before, and we're seeing them for the first time in hundreds and thousands of years.
They basically map the seafloor off the coast here. So if you were to take all the water out of the ocean and wanted to know what it looked like, that's essentially what we do. We could show you every nook and cranny, shipwreck, or habitat on the seafloor.
Here's a nice chart back in 2015 of the Northeast coast. From the January to March period, there was 1 whale death denoted by that black dot farther out to sea, which we do not know the cause of. But aside from that, there were essentially no whale deaths during that period at that time. Now, fast forward to 2023, same area, same time frame, January to March, so approximately maybe the same number of whales in the area. A large number of whale deaths, denoted by the black dots again. And then those colored areas denote where these vessels were at the same time. Almost everywhere, with a few exceptions, whenever there was a whale death, there was at least one and more of these survey vessels present. So there is a correlation between when and where the whales died and the vessel presence. And this is just a piece of the evidence that we've assembled regarding the vessel surveys. There are likely more deaths offshore that are not seen, but just the ones that washed ashore, the 11 in 4 months, is much, much greater than the historic annual average that we've seen in New Jersey, which is just 7. So we've seen 7 for a year, but when the vessel survey started, then we saw 11 in just 4 months. So this is unprecedented number of whale deaths off the coast. We believe there's ample connections between the increased vessel survey, the spike in the whale deaths, to certainly warrant a thorough investigation. There were also 25 dolphin deaths in that same period, which so far have gone unexplained. And just like the whale deaths, that is an unprecedented number of dolphins to come ashore in that short period of time. So both the whales and the dolphin fatalities need to be investigated thoroughly. To not investigate this seems to us just to be not responsible. And we have tried to go through in a systematic way and illuminate for people these pieces of evidence. And we do have a report on this, which we're making available. It points to the vessel surveys as the most likely cause of the whale deaths, and certainly warrants an investigation by the responsible agency. We have filed litigation to have the court direct the agency to do that, but frankly, it shouldn't require litigation for the responsible agency to conduct an investigation on something that jumps out at you as a likely cause. One argument that the wind proponents made against us when we said that the vessel surveys were causing this, because we cited previous events around the world when they were doing oil and gas surveying. Sure. And those took place maybe 6, 7 years ago. And all these groups now that are on the sidelines, they went crazy over that and they sued and everything. But when we brought that up and we said, well, you know, there have been events like this in the past, and they've been associated with vessel surveys for oil and gas, and their response was, well, those vessels used air guns. And air guns are much louder, much more powerful than the sparker units used here. And at first blush, that's correct. The source level from the air gun is louder than the sparker unit. However, what they neglected to say was that the direction of the air guns is mostly downward. The noise goes mostly downward below the vessel and just characterizes that area below the vessel. So if you're a whale under the vessel, that's not so great. But the noise level going outward, horizontally, where most of the animals will be, are similar, because the sparker unit emits energy in all directions, not just downward. So they neglected a key technical point, and so we brought that up. And then there's one more element to that. The agency has developed what they call these weighting functions. And this is supposed to tell you what the whale hears. Like, we all hear better at certain frequencies than other frequencies. So they made these predictions of what the whale will hear at this frequency and that frequency and so on. And their recent prediction for the right whale and what they call, and these other, what they call baleen whales, they operate at low frequency. At least that's what we've been told, that they are low frequency specialists. They communicate with low frequency noise. And low frequency noise travels much better in the ocean than high frequency. And that's how they can communicate with each other. And I don't know what the hell they say, but you know, they communicate over 100 miles. And that's what we've been told. Recently, they developed this weighting function that says, well, these whales, they really don't hear so good at these low frequencies. So even if we put out this low frequency noise from pile driving or whatever, the whale's not going to hear it. And so, you know, again, this is like the migration corridor. And look, I could be wrong. Maybe the weighting function has some validity. You know, they had a bunch of people working on it. Maybe some of it's correct. But on its face, it doesn't make sense. It just doesn't make sense. Now you're telling us the whale doesn't hear well at 50 cycles per second. However, another group of scientists said, but the whale vocalizes at 50 cycles per second. It sends out calls at 50 cycles per second. So then I'm thinking about this, and I'm thinking, okay, the whale calls, it's been calling out, they call it the up call. It's been calling out with the up call for 1,000 years, but it's never gotten an answer because the other whales can't hear it, right? But the whale just keeps calling. So it's like, okay. So again, I could be wrong. I could be wrong, you know, but on its face, it just looks ridiculous. And again, explain. All you see now in these documents they put out is they say, we're using the auditory weighting function of 2017 to calculate the impact. That's it. That's it. They don't say, we believe this is valid for the right whale because XYZ. None of that. They do not give an explanation. It's just almost gets silly. I don't know how to explain it. It's like, it seems like they'll just make up anything to make the project look good. Just to amplify a little bit on the role that I had at the Energy Department, I was fortunate enough that the way the department was organized, I had a fair amount of independence to push back when we felt that a program was not describing accurately all its environmental impacts. We were organized separately. I won't bore you with the official names, but we were in an element of the department that was not part of the coal and nuclear and natural gas programs. So we were able to exercise some independence, and by and large we had very good relations with those programs, and once we explained to those programs what the legal requirements were, not just what I was asking for, but the legal requirement is a full disclosure of environmental impacts, whether you like that or not. We very often had very good relations, and people would want to do the job right. Now, my understanding of the situation in the Interior Department is that that environmental impact statement preparation function is housed within the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management, which sort of makes it part of the promotion of the program. And that may not be a good thing because, again, it's expected that folks promoting a particular program always want to put it in the best light, and that's perfectly understandable. But it may be better if that environmental impact statement function was removed from the program itself and perhaps placed in another part of the Interior Department. But maybe I'm going too far. I don't want to tell the secretary how to organize her department, but we found that that worked relatively well in the Energy Department. So in a court, again, depending on how far the judge wants to get into this, I would hope that we'll have testimony. I would hope he'll have oral hearings so these folks can not just be hiding behind cut and paste stuff, you know, and force them to stand before a judge and explain why the right whale cannot hear at this frequency when it keeps calling out at that frequency. Because I believe if these people are forced to come out and be subjected to cross-examination, I think they're going to be hard-pressed to defend their positions. And one other counter-argument that was put forward was that the spike in whale deaths was due to vessel strike. But it wasn't clear that was vessel strike. To begin with, the Marine Mammal Stranding Center here classified some of the events as blunt force trauma or possible vessel strike, but the agencies quickly interpreted that as vessel strike. But that could have been precipitated by the noise, which could have disoriented the whale and caused it to become more vulnerable to possible vessel strike, or perhaps beach itself on the shore, or lose communication with calves and mothers and so on. The vessel traffic off New Jersey in that time period from November through March actually decreased. It did not increase. We've been talking about costs to marine mammals. Let me talk a little bit about dollar costs to humans. Electric cost increases. This is expensive technology. There's really no way that your electric bill can go down. There has not been a lot of data put out on this, but we believe it should be. It's very important to households, to businesses. We did our own analysis of the program plan for New Jersey, an 11,000 megawatt program, and we found that electric bills will go up by 30% in the residential sector, 40% in the commercial sector, and 50% in the industrial sector. These are obviously very significant increases, not just to households and to the person paying the bill or the company paying the bill, but to our competitive nature as a state. You know, we compete with other states and other countries for business. An electric cost increase like this may significantly hurt our competitiveness here and abroad. So this again is a subject that has not been illuminated. We believe it must be illuminated. And you may have heard that a number of the wind energy companies are now coming in and asking for additional rate increases, saying that they are experiencing cost increases and supply chain issues, which could even drive these costs up further. Let's talk about one more thing with this paper. We spoke about the risks to the whales. Let's talk about the risk to our own vessels, because these areas take up a lot of territory, and it is highly likely that our own commercial and military vessel traffic, of which there is a lot going up and down the East Coast, will not be allowed in those wind complexes. And you know, that makes sense. Why would you want to put large vessels meandering back and forth with huge structures on one side and the other only about a mile apart, in some cases about 6/10 of a mile apart. So that means that there's going to be a substantial rerouting of our own vessel traffic, and it's going to have to go either, like the Whale, much further offshore or into very narrow corridors closer to shore. So now you're talking about concentrating a good deal of large vessels, commercial, military, fishing, into narrow corridors, and that poses a navigation risk in and of itself, and that is further exacerbated by the fact that, based on a recent National Academy of Science study, the marine radars on these vessels may be compromised by the wind turbines on either side of them. So now you are also looking at significant vessel risk and potential collision issues, which in our view have not been addressed well in recent studies. A while back, we saw this chart from the Navy that showed that red zone, which was in the inner part of this lease area, and it was labeled as a Department of Defense exclusion zone for wind turbines. So that didn't sound so great. We contacted the DoD trying to find out what exactly an exclusion zone meant and what was the reason for that. We could not get an answer, which may be understandable. It may involve some classified information, but even if it does, the issue still needs to be addressed by the proper people, and there are ways of doing environmental reviews with classified information and restricting that information, obviously, to the people who need to know it. So at this point, we can only speculate as to what the reason for that is, but one concern that we do have is with our radar and sonar capabilities, which do look out over the airspace and over the sea space for unwanted aircraft and submarines and so on. We do have in New Jersey military radars in Gibbsboro, New Jersey. They're about 40, 50 miles inland, but we do understand they look out towards the ocean for unwanted aircraft. The wind turbines could potentially degrade those radars. And there was some evidence of that in a prior radar interference study that was done for the Ocean Wind project off Atlantic City. We had hoped to see a radar interference study for the Atlantic Shores project, but there was nothing in the environmental impact statement. So that's a concern. It needs to be resolved. Would like to hear something, whether it's classified or not, would like to hear some statement from the Secretary of Defense that this is not a problem. Otherwise, if it is a problem, then perhaps again, the size, the location of this project needs to be reviewed. A similar issue with our sonar capabilities, and again, we do not know where we have those installations. I'm sure that is classified, but the noise levels and the obstruction underwater to our sonar signals looking outward for unwanted submarines may also be impaired, and there have been episodes of Russian submarines trying to come close to our coasts. And The turbines planned off LBI, Long Beach Island, start at 9 miles offshore. They're over 1,000 feet high. There's absolutely no way that is not visible just about all the time. Despite what some folks have said, that it'll only be visible part of the time or not visible. The geometry just refutes that. So the seascape will be gone. You will not be able to see a natural seascape, and to many people that's important. It has a lot of value just in and of itself. Some folks say that's just aesthetics. It doesn't really count. But it does count. It does count. For many centuries, human beings have gravitated to the sea and to the shore for lots of different reasons, some economic reasons, some pleasure, some satisfaction. There is something that human beings like about a natural seashore. So to us, obviously it's different for every person, but it is not something to be given up lightly without good cause. And that's important. It's important to people who live on Long Beach Island. It's important to the many more people who come here to visit and enjoy that seascape. So it's kind of a treasure. And again, you don't give these things up without really giving it some thought and having some compelling reason to do that. And many studies have shown that the visible turbines will not be received well by tourists, by renters, and that there will be significant downturns in the tourism industry, in rentals, and yes, in property values as well, which some folks would like to dismiss as, well, people just have a selfish interest in their property, but the fact of the matter is, it's a real interest, and it's something that people need to have a property that is valuable. We started the organization, we started with 10 people. Now we have about 8,000 supporters. Again, all political persuasions and all working together very, very well. I think it's perhaps a good lesson for Washington that, you know, once we all just decide on what we want to do, that the labels and the political affiliations just sort of fall by the wayside. So that's been a very good experience. And again, our goal at this point, we just want to see some good information out there based on what we know of that information. We believe it does argue very strongly that many of these projects are not well grounded and should be relooked at. And in terms of, again, the broader goals, you know, if the goal here was to address climate change in some way or to provide leadership in that arena, there are so many other ways to reduce greenhouse gases that are actually cheaper than offshore wind, much less environmentally damaging. So again, if that's the objective here, we would suggest that the policymakers go a little bit back to the drawing boards, look at some other options. There are many things there that could do that and not cause this much disruption and public concern. The decommissioning of these projects at the end of their useful life, perhaps 20 years from now, I think you've probably heard, again, reassuring phrases. They'll be removed, recycled, disposed of, and so on. However, there has really been no solid plan that's in place, either at the federal level or the state level, to assure that that's going to happen. There has never been any turbine like this removed. We have no experience worldwide with the dismantling and removal of a turbine this size. We have not seen cost estimates for that. If it occurs, there are noise impacts from that, because it would involve substantial cutting and dismantling of a very large structure. And even the word decommissioning is not defined. The word itself just means putting something out of service. It doesn't speak to removal or dismantling. And the fact is that our current regulations governing this do not require removal of these structures. The federal agency, the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management, can decide to leave some turbines in place. If someone claims it's become a fish sanctuary, they can allow them to be toppled in place and left on the seabed. And so there is no hard and fast requirement to even remove the structures, much less the cabling and the substations. Beyond that, there is no financial assurance put in place here. There's no required fund that a company has to pay into during its operational years to assure that their money is available to do this at the end of the useful life. So we have a lot of concerns that at the end of the useful life of these projects, that the companies may not put in the funds to remove them, and there will be a significant burden left to the taxpayer at the federal and state level. So it's another subject. It requires a lot of attention, and it may warrant additional legislation by the Congress to make sure that at the end of the lifetime of these projects, they are appropriately removed, and that the hundreds of thousands of acres of productive seabed and sea area is restored to its previous uses. If you are concerned, whether you're an LBI resident or not, does not matter. Again, this is, to many people, a resource, both the on-land resource to humans and the offshore resources to the marine mammals. This is valuable resource. We should not be throwing this away without some totally compelling reason to do so. If you're concerned about that, please visit our website, www.savelbi.org. There's a wealth of information there about all the impacts that I've discussed, and there's ample ways to donate to us to help with the litigation, or to volunteer your time and your work to help us on that as well, because I think you can tell there are many, many issues involved here. It's not a simple matter, and we welcome the help of people to research some of the issues that we have not been able to cover as well. So I hope you pay attention to this, because I do believe that we're not making smart decisions right now, and the consequences of this, if these projects are put in place in unwise places, will be very significant and regrettable, and it will be something that just will not be good for the country. So please pay attention to this, spend some time learning. What side you come out on is up to you, but it does deserve your attention and perhaps your support. Thank you.